Last week, the Supreme Court reversed a century of law that I believe will open the floodgates for special interests, including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections.
I'm confident that the Supreme Court will not take what would be an unprecedented, extraordinary step of overturning a law that was passed by a strong majority of a democratically elected Congress.
Okay, that second clip there, he's referring to the Affordable Care Act. At the time that the case had been heard and the justices were still behind closed doors, hashing it out and getting ready to write their opinions, the first one at the State of the Union, and he got that characterization of their ruling so wrong that even PolitiFact didn't buy it. I mean, Bradley, that's saying something.
Yeah, look. President Trump is not the first one to have had criticisms of the judiciary, to criticize particular rulings. But what you didn't hear in those clips that you just played, and what you wouldn't hear in clips if you pulled it from President Bush, was the petty, juvenile kind of, grade school mockery he uses, this Twitter commentary he pulls out, calling them so-called judges, saying they don't know what they're talking about, saying they don't care about national security. That, I think, that type of vitriol, that type of verbiage is what concerned the Chief Justice in my view, and is why the Chief Justice did this rather unusual thing to publicly respond and say there are no Obama judges or Trump judges, and that is something to be concerned about going forward.
John, give us some historical context, because, listen, these branches have had dust-ups before.
Yeah, John Roberts ought to grow up. He's a big boy. Judges are big boys and big girls. They have life tenure on their Constitution. They should not listen to what presidents do. Their only job, because they have life tenure, is decide the cases as they see them. President Trump follows, in response to your direct question, Shannon, a long line of presidents who have attacked judges, attacked the Supreme Court, and have done things much worse than President Trump. Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, Abraham Lincoln, and Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt tried to pack the court and add 6 justices to the Supreme Court because he didn't like the way the justices were trying to block the New Deal. So I think the real answer is John Roberts should just stick his fingers in his ears and stop listening to President Trump's taunts. He's almost playing into President Trump's political game.
Well, yeah, a lot of people are surprised that he would engage in any way, though he didn't mention the president by name. But obviously, as the head of the judiciary, he's going to be very defensive and protective of the way the judges are viewed across the board. Now, as to whether or not you can say someone is an Obama judge or a Trump judge, those kinds of things, we all know that presidents choose judges that agree with their judicial philosophy. Here's Rush Limbaugh on the idea of pretending that that's not so.
We sure as hell do. What the hell is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals? That's where they all go. Everybody knows we have Obama judges. Obama has appointed left-wing hacks to act as judges.
Well, and Bradley, people would say that President Bush and President Trump, they pick people who line up with their judicial philosophies. But again, you wouldn't pick someone that you thought was going to go against the way that you view the Constitution, statutory interpretation, that kind of thing.
Of course not, but that's also a very simplistic view that the president has on how judges operate. I litigate before judges all the time. I've litigated before Bush judges, Clinton judges, Obama judges, and now Trump judges. And I can tell you, by and large, with a very small fraction of the cases, the judges are not what you would think of in terms of they're just doing their politicians' bidding. They apply the law as they saw it. That doesn't always go the way the original president who appointed them may have sought, but that's how they do their job. And it's in the best interest of, the best view of how they see the law being applied there. And to just characterize them as Obama judges or Trump judges is simply not the reality of litigation.
Yeah, I mean, John, is that fair? Because, listen, judges, I think, they take an oath not to be partisan, not to serve any particular interest. We've seen judges rule against and justices rule against the presidents who've appointed them. They can absolutely be objective.
The problem is we have to distinguish between partisanship and ideology. As you mentioned, one of the reasons we elect presidents, and one of the main reasons conservatives supported President Trump, was because he promised to appoint a certain kind of judge who would limit his discretion to the original meaning of the Constitution. And Obama judges and Clinton judges are picked on very different ideological grounds. It's not Democrat-Republican. It's just different ways of looking at the Constitution. And I'm afraid when you look at the lineup of judges who are resisting the president's immigration order here and the travel ban before, they all tend to have been appointed by Clinton and Obama judges. And the ones that upheld the ban tend to have been appointed by President Bush, Reagan, or now Trump. That is actually what the Constitution envisions, because it gives the power to nominate justices in the president and gives their confirmation to an elected Senate. The framers didn't want our judges to be actually kind of nonpartisan, neutral people. They wanted the politics to be involved in their appointment.
Well, the fact is that these opponents of the president are no dummies. They file in the Ninth Circuit for a very specific purpose because they know their best chance is there. And that's just factual. All right. John and Bradley, thank you both and have a wonderful Thanksgiving.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Thanks, Shannon.